Um, so yeah, as we mentioned earlier, right, and we're driving this home, right? You are part of a larger community, lots and lots of developers, and just interacting and keeping everybody up to date in what's going on. It's really really hard. Okay, I mean just the other week, somebody mentioned at a Scrum meeting, saying, "Oh, I'm working on writing these tests, and that does this, that, and the other," and somebody else in the same team came saying, "Wait a minute, I'm doing something similar. I've been working on it for a couple of days." Oh, me too. Within the same team, how could this be? Right? That there's this overlap, and the manager was surprised that this even happened. That And obviously, there was a meeting set up where these two developers compared notes, what they were actually doing, and they realized that actually there wasn't as much overlap as they thought there was. Right? One of them was working on implementing some monitoring scripts to see if certain data was actually coming every morning, whereas the other one was actually creating a test where you send data and make sure that it echoes the same data that you had sent. The two kinds of activities were very similar. They were hitting the same API. They were sending more or less the same data across, the same type of data, but they were mostly complementing each other as opposed to doing exactly the same thing, right? But nevertheless, it's very common that folks step over each other, that folks are doing redundant things, and it's a very very hard thing to do. There's very often management tries to deal with this by having cross team pollination where you have folks on one team just spend a couple of sprints in some other team, just to understand what others are doing and realize, oh, wait a minute, we're doing something similar. Could we perhaps generalize some of these tools and use them across multiple teams? So again, coordination is extremely extremely hard work, right? We oftentimes don't know where our world ends and somebody else's begins, right? And oftentimes it's out of our hands, right? Somebody else has architected this this way of working, and we have very little chance to change it. Yeah. So also we might be oftentimes dependent on data that somebody else is responsible for, or maybe some vendor that was chosen by management because of some political issues, right? That that we have to live with, nevertheless. So yeah. So it's very often we step over each other's work, we override each other's. It's really really hard. Okay, we miss things, we misinterpret things, and for as much effort as we make, things just fail, right? So we have to just accept it. So anyway, as part of the process, it might all start here at having conversations from the client. Typically, a business analyst would play this role. Hopefully somebody who understands the business would be and understands a little bit on the technology and the stack, would meet with the actual business owners and the client and try to retrieve some requirements. A lot of those requirements will be converted into stories or epics, organized into hopefully use cases that are going to be documented in this case Jira. We're going to be using Jira. It's I would say that it's a de facto standard for keeping track and collaborating online and keeping track of who's doing what's the current status of a particular task, and it integrates well with other tools such as GitHub or Bitbucket or Jenkins and whatnot, and it's part of this larger process. So today we'll chat about a little bit about using Jira. But typically it starts off every beginning of a sprint, where actually earlier than the sprint, the business analyst, the project manager, or the business owner will meet and look at a large bucket of tasks that are yet to be completed. They'll look this over. They'll see if there's any dependencies amongst the various tasks. We'll try to plan it in a particular sequence, depending on some business strategy or that overall strategy that the business has. Also, try to plan it in such a way that we can work on something that doesn't depend on something that is not there yet, right? Presumably, the project manager and some of the developers might participate in these discussions and lend some wisdom on how to sequence these tasks. Unfortunately, it often happens that developers are not invited to some of these meetings, and oftentimes it's only the business analyst and the business owner are deciding what to do. And what they might think it's hard, it's actually easy. And what they might think it's easy, it's actually very hard. Right? So there's always this dynamic of the teams, trying to have a say on how to sequence these tasks in the best way. Confluence is yet another collaboration tool. Is part of the same family of tools, Atlassian, that allows you to create all sorts of documents, online documents, all sorts of rich documentation, has lots and lots of different templates for gathering use cases and querying Jira for the current status of a project, and give you kind of like a dashboard on the creating dashboards for the health for measuring the health of the application, and just creating lots and lots of documentation. So for our project, you'll be responsible for keeping track everything on Confluence. It has integration with tons of different tools. It has evolved over the years to integrate with lots and lots of other collaboration tools. Me personally, I prefer Google Docs for just keeping everything and just having folks, being able to collaborate. But nevertheless, Confluence is by far still the standard for keeping track and integrating with other tools. So everybody gets a Confluence page, a Confluence space where they can have their own documentation, and have lots and lots of different templates for keeping minutes, meeting minutes, and use cases, and also for different parts of the Scrum, and also part at the end of the Scrum to do retrospectives and what did we do well in this sprint, what could we do better. What should we keep doing? What we should stop doing? Just to keep track of the history of how well have we done, and how can we improve in the upcoming sprints. So definitely Confluence. Meeting minutes, keeping track, dated. So give someone the role of the scribe, and you'll be able to send all the notes to one person, and that person will be responsible for keeping track of all the various questions and answers, and as you progress. Also for keeping track of requirements, and the different versioning. Yeah, so you can also create a different um, uh, um, workflows, right, on how who's responsible to keep track of different issues. The business analyst creating these, although everybody could create any issues and either assign them to themselves, or perhaps a project manager will assign it to whoever has a load the least load for that particular sprint. Ideally, at the beginning of a sprint, everything is set. You know exactly which stories or issues are going to be worked on that particular sprint, and we don't add anything to that sprint. Ideally, we at the beginning of the sprint, everybody votes on what will be the effort of a particular issue, right? And you're playing a game that often referred as poker. What's the name? Oh, what's the name? Planning poker. What is it? Where you have these these cards, right, that have points on them, where everybody votes. How do you think a particular task is going to be compared to other tasks that we have done in the past, right? Is it 1 point? If it's 2 points, 3 points? It's a very subjective feeling, right, of what you think a particular effort is going to be, and you compare it against a historical votes that you have done in the past, right? And some folks will vote very very low. Some folks will vote very high, and usually you ask those folks that are the outliers to defend their position. Why do you think it's so easy? Why do you think it's so hard? And it just opens up the discussion where we come to an agreement on why we think it's easy or hard. And eventually, right, the idea is that each one of these tasks will converge, right, at a particular size for the particular cost of time and effort that a particular task is gonna have. Oftentimes, these outliers are because we might have folks that are in the QA team might not know exactly how things are implemented, and they might think that something is really, really hard, as opposed to a developer who might know a little more, might vote that something is actually very easy, or vice versa, right? The tables might turn when we try to cost or estimate QA tasks for the QA team. But eventually, ideally, we have several rounds of these poker planning pokers, and we all converge into a particular effort. And we say, well, this particular task that's going to be assigned to Joe, that sounds like a 3, sounds like a 5, it sounds like an 8. And as we progress over several sprints, we look at our previous history, and in our retrospective, we can look at that we were way off. That's okay. It is okay to be way off. Ideally, you look at and says, well, I overly simplify it. I thought that this was really, really simple, but it actually turned out to be fairly complex. And that means that this institutional knowledge stays within the team, and you become more and more. You improve your planning going forward. Ideally, you can then add up all the points in a sprint and say, okay, well, this team with 5 developers and 2 QAs can handle 30 points every sprint, right? And as you accumulate this historical knowledge, you identify that you fine tune how many points can you actually do in a sprint, and that becomes what's called the velocity. How many points can you address for every sprint? And so that allows you to, in the future, be a little more confident on calculating the points, how much you actually can do in a particular sprint, right? As you add up, it says, "Ooh, wait a minute! No, we've come to our threshold of 30 points for a sprint, right?" And you always want to try and under promise, right, and over deliver. It's better to to promise little things, right, but then go and actually deliver more than what you promise. You don't want to be the other way around, right? So yeah, you have to find your inner no, saying no at a task, but have a good argument why it might not be a good idea to tackle a certain task because we are either not ready, we don't have the skills, or we don't have a particular dependency ready there. So I just wanted to illustrate one of the tasks that I was working on, jira, this last summer that I consult sometimes at this company, Houghton Mifflin. They're book publishers. They publish Lord of the Rings and all these cool books. So here's a team, and this is the backlog that just shows just a list of tasks that somebody has written down just to make sure that we don't forget, right? We don't really know what kind of effort this might be. One of these lines, one of these issues might be an entire project, right? Or it might be something really, really tiny. We haven't gotten to it. It could be that ideally that the project manager and the business analyst can meet with certain developers and perhaps split any one of these into many smaller tasks. And here they have organized it into several releases that are targeted for a particular date. Right? So these were the backlog of tasks that we were hoping to meet by the end of September. September. Whereas we have also broken them down into different filters, right? What those tasks that are targeting work only in the front end, right? So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and creating client-side APIs. Also broken down also by server backlog. So these are all the things that need to access the database, create RESTful services, mostly Java, but also some stored procedure work in there. And they've organized it into these backlogs. Automation for testing purposes, right? That we have to write our own tools that we can automate. Press a button and just run different tests, hit different queries and APIs, and try to have confidence at the end, when we reach a milestone, that we are indeed ready to go. We feel confident with our code. Interaction with our vendors that provide all sorts of event handling with students submitting quizzes and homework and assignments, and teachers interacting with our system. But then our current sprint, we can see on who's doing what and in what at what stages they're in. And now these rectangles are meant to represent manual pieces of paper that summarize at a very, very high level, just on a title, what is it? What is the intended work that we need to complete? And it's at very different stages of completeness. In the to-do at the beginning of the sprint, every 2 or 3 weeks, whatever your team decides, we move things from the backlog and we move on to the to-do list of each one of the developers. Some front end, some back end, some QA engineers. Obviously, we all agree that within the two-week sprint or 3-week sprint, whatever your team decides, that we will have completed these. We will have pushed all these all the way down to the done, right? And that if something wrong happens, right? So if there's some risk that we identify throughout the sprint, that we keep the entire team up to date, right? That I thought I was going to be able to finish, but I'm not. So that if some other person in the team has completed, perhaps we can move those tasks over to someone else. Okay. And again, we're looking to improve the overall efficiency of the team, not the individual. Obviously also the individual, but we want to measure the whether we complete everything by the end of the sprint. And Jira keeps track of all these statistics, right? Of how we did, what is the number of points that you had assigned to each one of these tasks. So here's one of them. If you click on it, that presumably is done, and you can navigate to that particular task. And here we have documented, all the various conversations. Instead of only having side conversations around the cooler, we also documented here so that tomorrow, if someone else has to pick up the work, they can come here and look at the all the various research that had been done for this particular story. And we assign folks to look at this, right, and read and provide their input as part of the conversation. And towards the end, you find that any pull requests, any PRs that had been created against this story can be linked to this particular ticket, so that they can go and look at what actually was done. Here's some changes that were done to a client side, and some changes were done to the server side. So if you click on the client side, you can follow along that it has been actually merged, and there were various commits for the. So notice that there's a link backwards and forwards, right? From the story, you can come to the pull request. From the pull request, you can go back to the original story, and often here you might have some conversation back and forth, right? Once you create the PR, you assign it to somebody to take a look at this. Take a look at this, and folks are going to comment on your code. They might give you some feedback, some constructive criticism on why don't you maybe rename this function or rename this variable, or why don't you do it this way or that other way, and at the end somebody might say, yep, I like it, and it's great, and they're responsible, right? When they say great and they're ready to merge, right, they're taking responsibility. It says that it's okay with them if ever they are responsible for debugging my source code, right? They're clicking on merge, so the code is theirs now, right, as well. Here's just to give you an idea on the sizes. Each one of these commits, there's 30 commits. Each commit I hope it's a fairly small, small improvements to the code, and ideally this one title captures the entire essence of what was accomplished, right? That nothing in this commit should not be based should not be away from or too far off from the title of the commit. So this refactored taxonomy API declaration. This just happens to be a better design pattern of moving services around. So again, this was just technical debt. Right? It wasn't actually implementing and fixing the problem. Was just bringing the source code up to a particular level of quality that had not been done earlier, and then just moving some source around and some technical debt that we had not had a chance to deal with in previous work. So fairly small. Some of them are pretty big in the sense that we had lots of data. That was huge pieces of data that used to live embedded that we had to move into different. So it's okay to have large amounts of source code that you might move around, especially if you're doing some technical debt. But it should be clear that that's all you're doing, right? You're moving this from one place to another. It's very well justified if you're doing something that might be questionable. Okay. All right. So that was some 5 minutes on Jira, and obviously you can take a look at that video that was provided.